The year 1989 began as a time of hope and promise. The town of Valdez, located in Prince William Sound and moderated by proximity to ocean waters, escaped the record low temperatures experienced by much of Alaska, although it had received 220 inches of snowfall in December and January alone. Over 2 feet of snow remained on the ground on the first day of spring, but the temperature was a relatively mild 43 degrees. Dan Lawn lived in Valdez, where he worked for the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. Lawn's job was to inspect facility and shipping operations at the terminus of the 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline for the state of Alaska. As far back as 1984, Lawn had observed and reported a troubling pattern of lax oversight and preparedness at the terminal. Among his concerns, the ability to respond to a large oil spill. In the early morning hours of Good Friday, March 24, 1989, U.S. Coast Guard vessel traffic controllers in Valdez received a radio call.
Yeah, it's Valdez back. We should be on your radar there. We've fetched up hard to ground north of Goose Island off Bly Reef. And evidently leaking some oil. And we're going to be here for a while.
We're approaching the Exxon Valdez.
Dan Lawn was among the first to be notified that the tanker Exxon Valdez had grounded on Bly Reef.
At the time I got notification of the oil spill, I'd been asleep for 2 or 3 hours. And I got a call from the Valdez Marine Terminal that the ship, the Exxon Valdez, had run aground at Bly Reef and was leaking some oil.
He rowed a pilot boat out to investigate the scene and recorded the first photos and video of the stricken tanker. Arriving on the bridge of the tanker, only a few hours after Captain Joseph Hazelwood's radio call to the Coast Guard Vessel Traffic Control Center, Dan Lawn documented the initial attempts to calculate how much oil had been lost to that point. The result, in a little less than 4 hours, over 6,700,000 gallons had been spilled.
You can see it leaking there by 5 port.
The rate of loss from the ship was nearly 500 gallons of crude oil per second. 8 of 11 cargo tanks and 2 ballast water tanks had been torn open. Ultimately, the Exxon Valdez would leak 11.2 million gallons into the waters of Prince William Sound. While Dan Lawn and the Coast Guard scrambled to assemble and coordinate resources in Valdez, word of the accident spread across the state and throughout the lower 48. In Seattle, the Hazardous Materials Response Branch of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was notified early that first morning by the Coast Guard. This group, known as NOAA Hazmat, was created in the 1970s to provide scientific support and guidance during spills of oil and chemicals in the marine environment. Once characterized in a Seattle newspaper as eco-cowboys, NOAA Hazmat had established a reputation for rapid scientific response to environmental disasters. Following a frenetic morning of mobilization, the first wave of NOAA Hazmat responders departed for Alaska. By 7 p.m. March 24th, the first day of the spill, they were on the ground in Valdez and attending a press briefing with the Coast Guard and other response agencies. Over the next few weeks, NOAA Hazmat provided critical support for the response, detailing where the oil was and using computer models to predict where it would go. On the ground, NOAA team members helped to document initial oiling conditions on the beaches of Prince William Sound as resources were mobilized for what would become the largest oil spill cleanup in history. Just as the scale of the spill and response was unprecedented, so too were the challenges. Prince William Sound was remote and considered to be both a pristine and robust ecosystem that also supported important fisheries. Devising and implementing plans for cleaning oil from contaminated shorelines became complex negotiations among competing and often adversarial interests. The role of NOAA Hazmat scientists was to provide a neutral technical basis for the hard choices involved in the cleanup. Inevitably, their advice was not always embraced with open arms. As the weeks and months wore on in 1989, the oil on the shoreline weathered and became increasingly difficult to clean up. As a result, more aggressive techniques were developed and deployed. The use of high-pressure hot water to blast oil from the shoreline became more common. Dr. Jacqueline Michelle was a key part of the NOAA science team working in Alaska. Trained as a geomorphologist specializing in coastal processes and the behavior of oil on different shorelines, she had studied scores of oil spills worldwide by the time the Exxon Valdez grounding had occurred. But even with this background of experience, she was surprised by the scale of this spill and the disarray of the initial response.
It was total chaos. You know, as always is the case. People were just trying to get set up in space. We're just, even something like power for computers or desktop space for laying maps out, or phone. I think we felt lucky we got one phone so we could communicate with the outside world. So it was a lot of chaos, but a lot of folks came who had been doing spill response for a while, and so we just started around doing our job. But essentially, there was so much oil, the focus was on water recovery, and then we started gearing up for shoreline cleanup decision making.
Because of her expertise in oil spill fate and effects, Michelle dealt with many of the complex scientific issues that arose. For example, some working on the response felt that seasonal storms at the end of the first year would remove much of the oil from the beaches. So Jackie Michelle monitored shoreline conditions through the winter. Dave Kennedy's concern about the effects of aggressive shoreline cleanup and Jackie Michelle's finding that oil had persisted on the beaches after the first winter led to a more comprehensive NOAA program to document the physical and biological consequences of both oil and cleanup. The monitoring revealed that most plants and animals on oiled beaches, such as seaweeds, barnacles, and snails, recovered after around 4 years. But ongoing studies have shown that pockets of oil remain on some beaches, persisting far longer than many had expected. Continuing research aims to determine just how harmful this old oil might prove to be. NOAA Hazmat used the results of its studies to improve the guidance it provides during oil spill responses. In addition, the rare opportunity to study an area affected by an oil spill over many years has contributed to our understanding of how a complex ecosystem like Prince William Sound's responds to disturbance, especially in the face of other large-scale changes in the marine environment caused by climate change, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and cataclysmic events like tsunamis and hurricanes. 20 years later, the Exxon Valdez spill still means different things to different people, and it endures as a source of controversy, even as it recedes into history.
There's still oil in Prince William Sound 20 years later, and in some places quite a bit.
It just happened to be the Exxon Valdez. It just happened to be Exxon's ship. It could have been Arco's, it could have been BP's, it could have been anybody's ship. The reason the spill occurred is the system had deteriorated to the point where oversight was lax.
There's a lot of interest in sort of revisiting, 20 years later, what have we learned? What still needs to be done, if anything?
I'm starting to see that we're falling back into this complacency that existed before the oil spill.